Emotional story. Millionaire CEO sees shivering girl hugging teddy bear. What he did next will shock you. The night air carried a biting chill, sharper than broken glass, and every breath turned into a faint white cloud that disappeared instantly into the darkness. The city seemed asleep, yet the silence felt heavy, almost unbearable, as snow clung to the corners of abandoned shops and faded billboards. Streetlights buzzed faintly, their weak glow struggling against the shadows while cracks on the sidewalk looked like scars left behind by time. A stray dog padded across the road, its paws sinking into the thin layer of frost, the sound of its whimper echoing faintly before vanishing down an alley. On a lonely bench near a broken lamppost sat a small figure, a girl hugging her knees tightly, trying to make herself smaller, her tiny frame lost in the vast emptiness of the street. A ragged teddy bear rested in her arms, its fur matted with age, and she clutched it so tightly as if letting go meant losing the last piece of safety she had. Her dress was too thin, barely enough for summer, let alone this freezing night, and a sharp wind whipped past, making her shiver violently. Her hands were red, almost raw from the cold, and she tried to tuck them under the teddy bear's arms for warmth. Her lips trembled, forming faint whispers no one could hear, while the bench beneath her was icy, but she didn't move, frozen in place, both from the weather and despair. The city lights in the distance looked like another world, far away from her reality, and when a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminated her fragile figure, the driver looking but quickly moving on. Footsteps echoed on the sidewalk as a man hurried past, his eyes falling on her for just a moment before he turned away, pulling his scarf higher and walking faster as if afraid of her presence. The girl lowered her gaze, used to being unseen, used to being ignored, and whispered to her teddy bear, "It's okay, we're fine," her voice cracking but forcing a small smile. The bear's button eye reflected the faint streetlight staring back silently, and she pressed her cheek against its head, pretending it answered her. The cold, however, refused to be ignored, seeping into her bones and making every small movement painful. She rubbed her feet together, but her shoes had holes in them, the snow melting into the worn fabric and soaking her toes. Her stomach growled softly, but she hugged the teddy tighter to distract herself as the night stretched endlessly, each minute slower than the last. A neon sign across the street flickered on and off, buzzing like a broken heart, its glow reflecting faintly on her tired eyes. She blinked slowly, fighting back tears that threatened to spill, knowing crying would only make her colder, so she bit her lip and looked at the empty road ahead. The city, once full of life, now felt like a ghost town to her, and laughter from a distant bar reached her ears, muffled but painful, making her wish she could belong to a place like that, warm, bright, alive. But here she was, alone on a frozen bench, with only her teddy bear as the wind tugged at her hair, strands sticking to her damp cheeks. Her small shoulders shook as she tried to hold back sobs, not wanting to seem weak, not even to her teddy bear. A group of young men walked past with heavy coats and shopping bags, one of them glancing at her but quickly looking away, laughing with his friends, their joy making the silence around her feel even heavier. She shifted slightly, curling deeper into herself, and when the teddy bear slipped from her grip, her eyes widened in panic as she scrambled to pick it up, brushing off the snow with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered, hugging it tighter than before, because to her the teddy was more than cloth and stuffing. It was family. It held the warmth of memories she couldn't let fade. She remembered her mother's smile, faint and blurry now but still tied to the toy, and that memory was the only fire left in her frozen world. The silence returned, broken only by the crunch of her shifting feet on snow, while a faint whistle of wind passed through the nearby alleyways. The bench creaked beneath her as she leaned forward, chin on her teddy, her eyelids growing heavy though she resisted sleep, knowing the cold could be dangerous if she let it take her. She sat upright again, shaking herself awake, her breath coming out faster now, fogging the air in front of her. Hugging the teddy so close it almost disappeared in her arms, she glanced at every passerby with quiet hope, but none returned her gaze, the ache of disappointment layering itself over her exhaustion. A light flurry of snow began to fall, dusting her hair and shoulders, and she didn't even brush it off. It felt like part of her now. The snow sparkled under the weak glow of the street lamp, each flake melting quickly against her warm cheeks. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening to the silence, her body trembling but her grip on the teddy never loosening. The night stretched on, cold and merciless, as the girl remained still, waiting, wishing, hoping. And in that silent, frozen hour, the world continued to pass her by. The girl's small body trembled as she pressed her face deeper into the teddy bear's worn fur, her breath warming it slightly as she whispered softly, "You'll keep me warm, right?" Her fragile voice floated into the empty night, breaking the silence like a secret too heavy for her heart to carry alone. She closed her eyes tightly, as if the toy could hear her words, as if it could somehow answer back. With every squeeze of her thin arms, she convinced herself that the bear could shield her from the biting air. The streets around her felt endless, but the world in her arms, just her and the teddy, was the only place she found comfort. She rested her chin on its small head, her lips brushing the fabric, whispering promises that only a child could believe. To her, the teddy was alive, more alive than the people who had walked past her without stopping. Its button eyes had seen her tears, its ragged stitches had held her secrets, and though its stuffing had grown thin, to her it was still the safest place she knew. She remembered her mother's gentle hands tucking the teddy into her arms years ago, her voice saying, "Take care of him, and he'll take care of you." That memory still lingered, fragile but unbroken, like a light flickering in the storm. Her throat tightened as she thought of her mother, the warmth of her embrace, the lullabies that once filled her nights. The teddy was the last bridge to that world, the last gift of love she could cling to. The wind picked up again, harsh and sharp, tugging at her hair and forcing her to curl into a ball. She pulled the bear closer, pressing it against her chest, as though protecting it from the cold as much as it protected her. The night felt cruel, but she fought against it by holding tighter, burying her face in the toy's faded fabric until it smelled only of her tears. "Don't leave me too," she whispered, her words shaky but filled with desperation. She rocked slightly on the bench, the teddy swaying with her, as if it were both her anchor and her shield. Her tiny arms ached from holding so tightly, but she refused to let go. She imagined the bear whispering back, telling her she wasn't alone, that she was brave, that tomorrow might be brighter. For a moment, she almost believed it. A snowflake landed on the bear's head, and she brushed it away quickly, whispering, "You'll catch cold." She giggled faintly, a sound so soft it almost disappeared into the air, yet it gave her a fleeting sense of warmth, and her imagination painted the teddy as more than fabric and thread. It was a companion, a listener, a friend who would never walk away. She thought of the nights when hunger gnawed at her, and she had spoken to the teddy as if it could feed her with stories. Tonight was no different. She poured her fears and hopes into its silent embrace. The bench beneath her was hard, the night endless. Yet with the teddy in her arms, she felt a fragile sense of safety. She leaned forward, curling tighter, pressing her knees against her chest, so the teddy was cradled safely between her arms and legs. The cold scratched at her skin, but the closeness of her toy made her heart beat steadier. She whispered again, "It's just you and me," as though making a pact with it, a promise that neither would abandon the other. The loneliness pressed heavy on her, but the bear absorbed it, carrying it quietly without complaint. She stared into its button eyes, imagining they blinked back at her, tired but loyal. A tear slid down her cheek and landed on its face, darkening the worn fabric, but she smiled faintly through the tears, pretending it was the teddy crying with her. She felt less alone that way. The world had been unkind, people had passed her by, but this small toy had never left her side. In the silence, she listened to her own heartbeat echoing against the bear's chest, and she pretended it was two hearts beating together. She whispered one more time, "Don't be afraid. I'll keep you safe too." And with those words, she closed her eyes tightly, as if the promise itself could build a wall against the freezing night. The night remained cruel and unforgiving when the distant hum of an engine broke the silence, its low growl growing louder as headlights sliced through the snowy street. A sleek black car approached the corner, its polished surface reflecting the faint glow of the street lamps. Inside, Adrian Cole sat in the back seat, his posture straight, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen of his phone. He was a man of stature, a young millionaire CEO whose name carried weight in boardrooms and headlines alike, a man admired for his relentless ambition and criticized for his ruthless decisions. Tonight, he was dressed in a tailored suit, the sharpness of his attire matching the sharpness of his reputation, and his mind was focused on the meeting ahead, one that promised to shape another empire-shaking deal. The city outside barely mattered to him. The lives of strangers were just shadows beyond the tinted glass. Yet as the car rolled forward, something at the edge of his vision made him glance up. For a fleeting moment, he almost dismissed it as another passerby, another piece of the city's endless noise, but his gaze lingered. His eyes landed on a fragile figure sitting alone on the bench, a small girl clutching something tightly in her arms. The street lamp above flickered, casting a pale light over her trembling form, and in that light, Adrian saw not just a child, but a story written in silence. His fingers paused mid-gesture on his phone screen, the glowing numbers and emails fading from his mind. He leaned closer to the window, his brows narrowing, as he realized what she was holding. A worn-out teddy bear, pressed to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her alive. The world around him seemed to fall quiet, the sound of the engine muffled, the weight of the night pressing heavier on his chest. For the first time in years, the unshakable rhythm of his business-driven life faltered. His driver glanced through the mirror, noticing his boss's sudden stillness, but said nothing. Adrian's jaw tightened, a strange heaviness settling in his throat, one he couldn't quite name. The meeting ahead, the contracts waiting for his signature, the millions on the line, all of it blurred as he kept staring at the little girl. Her thin shoulders shook under the weight of the cold, her face buried against the teddy, her small figure looking painfully out of place against the endless street. Something in that image struck him deeper than any corporate battle ever had. He inhaled slowly, his breath fogging faintly against the cold window glass, and without hesitation, he spoke two words that surprised even himself. "Pull over." The driver blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "Sir?" he asked cautiously. Adrian's voice grew firmer, more urgent this time. "I said, pull over." The car eased to the side of the road, tires crunching softly over the snow. Adrian's hand tightened around his phone, then slowly lowered it, as though the device itself no longer mattered. His eyes stayed locked on the girl as the vehicle came to a stop, the warmth of the leather seat beneath him contrasting painfully with the sight of her trembling in the cold. For years, Adrian Cole had been known as a man of steel, a heart closed off to sentiment, a leader untouched by emotion. Yet in this moment, he felt something stir, an unfamiliar ache that no wealth could quiet. Watching her, he realized he couldn't just drive past. Something about her small frame, her desperate hold on the teddy, and the emptiness of the street around her pierced through the armor he had built over the years. His chest tightened, as if the silence of her suffering had reached inside and taken hold. He exhaled slowly, almost to steady himself, before reaching for the door handle. For a man who had built an empire on never stopping, never hesitating, this was the first time his world had come to a halt, all because of a little girl on a frozen bench. The car door opened with a soft click, and the cold rushed in to greet Adrian as he stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the thin blanket of snow. The sharp air stung his face, yet he barely noticed it, his eyes fixed on the fragile figure ahead. His expensive coat brushed against the frosty air as he walked forward, every step deliberate, quiet, as though approaching something sacred. The crunch of his shoes on the snow marked. Did the girl's head snap up, her wide eyes catching the dim light of the street lamp? Startled, she froze, clutching the teddy bear tighter, as if it might shield her from the stranger, now looming in the darkness. Fear flickered in her gaze, her tiny body pulling back into the bench as though she could vanish into the wood. Adrian saw it, the fear of someone too used to being abandoned, too used to strangers who never stopped for long. He slowed his pace, lowering himself down to her level until the cold wood of the bench creaked beneath his knees. For the first time in years, the proud CEO knelt in the snow, his posture no longer towering, his voice no longer sharp. "Sweetheart," he said softly, his words carrying the gentleness of a man trying to reach through walls built too high. "Why are you out here in the cold?" The question lingered in the frozen air, hanging between them like a fragile thread. The girl's arms tightened around the teddy bear, her small fingers gripping so hard her knuckles turned pale. She didn't answer at first. Silence seemed safer. Silence was what she knew. Adrian's heart ached at the sight, his chest tightening as if the cold had pierced right through his ribs. He waited, his breath forming small clouds in the night, refusing to rush her. Slowly she tilted her head down, her lips trembling before she finally whispered, "I don't have anywhere else to go." Her voice was so small, so cracked, that it almost disappeared into the night air. But Adrian heard every word, and each one cut through him like glass. No child should ever know the weight carried in that sentence. Yet here she was, speaking it as though it were normal, as though it had become her truth. He studied her face, pale and tired, her eyes holding years of pain she should never have lived. For the first time in so long, his own eyes softened, stripped of the businessman's steel, stripped of the walls that had made him untouchable. He saw her not as a burden, not as a distraction, but as a child, small, fragile, human. A lump formed in his throat as he realized how wrong the world had been to let her sit there alone. He lowered his voice further, almost a whisper now, as if afraid to break her fragile shell. "You shouldn't be out here by yourself," he murmured, his tone carrying more warmth than he remembered himself capable of. The girl blinked at him, uncertain, her grip on the teddy loosening just slightly as though his voice had reached a place she hadn't let anyone touch in a long time. Adrian held her gaze, his eyes steady, no longer the cold, calculating stare of a CEO, but the quiet concern of a man who could no longer pretend he didn't care. And in that moment, surrounded by snow and silence, two worlds collided. The world of power and wealth that Adrian belonged to, and the world of loneliness and survival that the little girl had been forced to endure. For a long moment after her whispered confession, silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft whistle of the wind through the street. Adrian's gaze lingered on the child, his chest tightening with a weight he couldn't ignore. Then, without a single word, he shrugged off his expensive coat, the fabric still warm from his body. Carefully, almost reverently, he draped it over her trembling shoulders. The oversized coat swallowed her small frame, but the moment it touched her skin, a faint sigh escaped her lips. She pulled it close around herself, as if afraid it might vanish if she didn't hold on tight. The warmth seeped into her fragile body, chasing away the cruel bite of the night air. Slowly, almost shyly, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, the first light he had seen on her face. "It's warm. Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet heavy with sincerity. The sound of those two simple words pierced something deep inside Adrian, a place that had long been buried beneath years of ruthless ambition and cold decisions. But even as she clung to his coat, he knew it wasn't enough. Warmth borrowed from him was only temporary, and he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her vulnerable once more. His eyes lifted toward the dim glow of a corner store still open despite the late hour. Rising to his feet, he turned briefly to his driver, signaling for him to wait, then walked across the snowy pavement with determination in his stride. Inside the store, the air was warmer, filled with the scent of fabric and leather, and Adrian's sharp eyes scanned the racks until they landed on a small, thick winter jacket. It was sturdy, lined with soft fleece, and colored in gentle shades of blue that reminded him of calm skies. Without hesitation, he purchased it, the cashier eyeing him curiously but saying nothing. Returning to the bench, he found the girl watching him with cautious eyes, the oversized coat still wrapped tightly around her. She blinked as he approached, confused but curious, until he knelt again and held out the new jacket. "This is for you," he said firmly, his tone carrying no room for doubt, but softened by unexpected warmth. "From now on, you won't be cold anymore." For a heartbeat, she simply stared, as though her mind struggled to believe the gesture was real. Then her small hands reached out, trembling as they touched the fabric, feeling the softness between her fingers. Her eyes lifted back to him, and this time tears welled. Not the bitter tears of loss she had grown used to, but tears that shimmered with something fragile and rare. Hope. Her throat tightened, and though her lips tried to form words, only a broken sound escaped before the tears spilled over, running down her red cheeks. She hugged the jacket against her chest like it was the most precious treasure she had ever held. Adrian felt something stir within him, something that had been dormant for far too long. It wasn't pride or duty. It was compassion, raw and unshaped, wrapping itself around his heart as tightly as his coat had wrapped around her. Watching her small frame tremble with emotion, he realized he had given her more than fabric. He had given her a promise, unspoken but true, that the world hadn't completely abandoned her, that warmth and kindness still existed, even for someone like her. The night no longer felt as cold, not for her, and not for him either. Adrian knew he couldn't simply walk away after placing a jacket in her hands. The thought of leaving her behind on that frozen bench gnawed at him, louder than the hum of the city or the logic that had always ruled his decisions. His life had been guided by contracts, profit margins, and boardroom strategies, but tonight none of those mattered. Tonight, there was only a child whose fragile world had been shattered, and a man who suddenly felt the weight of responsibility pressing firmly against his chest. Gently, he extended his hand toward her, not as a powerful CEO commanding attention, but as a man offering trust. She hesitated, her small fingers tightening on the teddy bear, but slowly she slipped her hand into his, fragile and trembling, yet searching for reassurance. He guided her carefully toward the car, the snow crunching beneath their steps, each one carrying them away from loneliness and closer to something new. The driver opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise, but Adrian's firm nod silenced any questions. The girl climbed into the warm interior, her wide eyes darting around the unfamiliar luxury, and for the first time in days, her tiny body began to relax. The heating embraced her like a shield, and she curled up with her teddy, the jacket still clutched tightly. Adrian settled into the seat across from her, his gaze softening as he watched her eyelids grow heavy with exhaustion. Yet he knew warmth alone wasn't enough. She needed food, shelter, and the certainty of safety. With quick precision, he made calls, instructing staff at one of his properties to prepare a room, fresh clothes, and hot meals. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, carried an unfamiliar gentleness that startled even those on the other end of the line. As the car moved through the city, the neon lights flashing past, the girl whispered faintly to her teddy, her voice fragile but steady. "We're safe now." The words made Adrian's throat tighten, as if the simple phrase had unlocked something buried deep within him. By the time they reached the quiet estate, she was asleep, her small body curled peacefully beneath the jacket. Adrian watched her, noting how her expression had softened, how the lines of fear had eased, replaced by the innocence of a child finally allowed to rest. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, as if she had been carrying the weight of the world with no one to share it. He carried her into the warm, welcoming house, where soft lights and the faint aroma of food greeted them. Staff stood silently, moved by the rare tenderness on their employer's face as he directed them with quiet authority to ensure she had everything she needed. A warm bed was prepared, layered with blankets that seemed almost too grand for her tiny frame, but Adrian insisted on nothing less. He laid her gently down, adjusting the covers so she wouldn't feel the cold, even in her dreams. The teddy bear rested beside her, still within her grasp, and though her eyes remained closed, a faint smile lingered on her lips, as if she sensed the safety surrounding her. Adrian stood by the bedside for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall in steady rhythm, his mind filled with questions he had never allowed himself to ask before. What was wealth worth if it couldn't protect someone like her? What good was success if it couldn't offer kindness? For years, his heart had been buried beneath walls of indifference, but tonight, those walls had begun to crumble. As he turned toward the window, the snow continued to fall outside, but inside, warmth had been restored, not only for the little girl, but for him as well. For the first time in years, he felt something heal within him, as if her whispered words had stitched together the broken pieces of his spirit. Sometimes, he realized, it wasn't the grand gestures or monumental deals that defined a life. Sometimes it was a small act of compassion, a jacket, a gentle question, an open hand, that could rewrite the course of another's story. That night, the girl slept in peace, no longer trembling in the cold, and Adrian found himself silently vowing that this would not be the end of their story. It would be the beginning, for her and for him. A chance to learn what it truly meant to be human,